In the world of women's tennis, once in a generation a name emerges that doesn't just climb the rankings, it rewrites what's possible. Today, that name is Eala. And what has just happened at the Cincinnati Open has sent shockwaves through the sport that almost nobody saw coming. For the first time in her career, the 21-year-old from the Philippines has been handed something no Filipino tennis player has ever received before: the number 17 seed at a WTA 1000 event, one of the most prestigious tiers in the sport. Just one level below a Grand Slam, but here's where it gets wild. That seeding came with no soft landing. Waiting on the other side of a potential run to the final are three of the most feared names alive on tour: Jessica Pegula, Iga Swiatek, Aryna Sabalenka. Three former Grand Slam finalists standing between Eala and a moment that could define her career. So how did a teenager whose family sacrificed everything just to keep her dream alive end up here, seeded, feared, and one of the most talked about names in tennis right now? And can she really survive what's waiting for her in Cincinnati? Stay with us. This story is bigger than one tournament. Subscribe to Tennis Pulse and hit the notification bell for more tennis news, drama, and analysis every week. Every great sports story needs an origin, and Eala's is one of the most remarkable in modern tennis. Long before the seedings and the world rankings, there was a young girl from the Philippines chasing a dream almost nobody around her believed was realistic. The Philippines is not a tennis nation. Basketball dominates the national imagination, and the infrastructure that produces elite tennis talent in countries like Spain or the United States simply doesn't exist there in the same way. For a Filipino child to dream of playing professional tennis at the highest level was, for decades, closer to fantasy than ambition. Eala refused to let go of it anyway. Her talent was obvious early, but talent alone doesn't build a tennis career. Tennis is one of the most expensive sports in the world. Travel, coaching, entry fees, and the endless junior circuit required to build a ranking add up to costs that can crush a family financially before a player ever turns professional. For a family without the corporate sponsorship networks common in tennis powerhouse nations, this was not a minor obstacle. The family found a way anyway. Eala's path eventually led her to the Rafa Nadal Academy in Mallorca, Spain, one of the most respected development environments in world tennis, where she trained alongside some of the best young players on the planet. Leaving home as a young girl to train on the other side of the world is a sacrifice few people understand unless they've lived it, missed milestones, and a level of discipline most adults never have to summon. The results showed quickly. In 2022, Eala won the girls' singles title at the US Open Juniors, becoming the first player from the Philippines to ever capture a junior Grand Slam. For a country with almost no tradition in the sport, this was a national moment. A country of over 100 million people suddenly had a real reason to believe it had produced a future star, but junior success rarely guarantees professional success. The jump from junior tennis to the WTA Tour is one of the hardest transitions in sport. For every junior champion who becomes a household name, dozens fade into obscurity within a few years. Eala refused to become one of them. She turned professional and ground through the lower levels: small ITF tournaments, budget travel, ranking points fought for one match at a time against players the wider tennis world had never heard of. This is the invisible part of every tennis career, the part that never makes headlines but decides everything. Then, in 2025, everything changed. At the Miami Open, one of the biggest combined events on the calendar, Eala arrived largely unknown to casual fans. What followed was one of the most electrifying underdog runs the tournament had seen in years. She took down a string of established, ranked opponents on some of the biggest courts in the sport, reaching the quarterfinals of a tournament many players spend entire careers dreaming of qualifying for. Overnight, she went from a name only hardcore tennis fans knew to a story covered by major outlets worldwide. That breakthrough wasn't a fluke, it was proof she belonged among the genuine elite. From that point, her trajectory shifted permanently. The rankings climbed. The invitations to bigger events started arriving. But nobody could have predicted just how fast that climb was about to accelerate in 2026. If Miami introduced Eala to the wider tennis world, 2026 is the season that cemented her as one of the sport's most dangerous rising forces. It began at Wimbledon, the oldest and most tradition-bound tournament in tennis. Eala advanced to the fourth round, the best Grand Slam result of her career, and became the first Filipino player ever to be seeded at a Grand Slam. In the entire history of tennis, no one from the Philippines had reached that milestone before. She did it in 2026. A remarkable Wimbledon alone would define a career year for most players. Eala kept going. As the tour shifted to North American hard courts, she carried her momentum into the Mubadala DC Open, a WTA 500 event in Washington, and won the entire tournament. It was her maiden WTA title, and she captured it by defeating Jessica Pegula, one of the most consistent players on tour, in the final. A player known months earlier for one electric underdog run had just beaten a Grand Slam finalist caliber opponent for a title. This wasn't luck. This was proof she belonged among the elite. The Washington win reshaped how the tour saw her. Opponents who might once have seen a match against Eala as routine now had to prepare for a genuine threat. Her ranking surged to a career high inside the world's top 20, a number that would have seemed fantastical just a couple of years earlier, when she was grinding through minor tournaments most fans had never heard of. Carrying that momentum into the Canadian Open in Toronto, Eala extended her win streak to 7 straight matches across 2 tournaments, a stretch very few players on tour match at any point in a season. Let alone while still establishing themselves among the elite. What makes this stretch so compelling isn't just the results, it's what they represent. This isn't a player having a good few months. This is a player recalibrating her own ceiling in real time, match by match. A player who has already beaten a top-tier opponent for a title doesn't walk onto a court against another elite name wondering if she belongs there. She already knows the answer. There's a bigger story here too. Eala has become one of the biggest draws in the sport regardless of where she plays. Her matches generate outsized attention, and an entire nation that has waited generations for a tennis star of this caliber is following every result closely. In a sport historically dominated by traditional tennis powerhouses, a breakout star from the Philippines competing for titles against the very best in the world is a genuinely rare story, but momentum always eventually meets resistance. And as the tour rolled toward Cincinnati, the next test was about to become the most demanding of her career. Every remarkable rise eventually runs into its first real wall. The moment sustained success collides with fatigue and opponents who've had time to study her game. For Eala, that moment arrived in Toronto, and how she handled it says as much about her as any of her wins. Arriving fresh off her title in Washington, Eala carried real seeded status into the tournament for the 3rd time in her last 4 events. Remarkable consistency for a player still establishing herself at this level. She continued to look sharp early, extending her win streak with no obvious signs of the post-title letdown that so often derails players riding a hot streak. Eventually, the run ended. Eala reached the 4th round before falling to Belinda Bencic, a former top 10 player whose tactical discipline and big match composure are exactly the kind of weapons that can slow down a player operating on emotion and momentum. A round of 16 finish is a strong result by almost any measure, but after a title and a 7-match win streak, the loss carried a different emotional weight. It was a reminder that even the hottest streaks eventually meet an opponent who can apply the brakes. What happened next reveals just as much about her as the result itself. Rather than rushing straight into her next event, Eala took a genuine break. Reports described her taking time for herself in Toronto, including something as ordinary as getting a haircut, before relaxing and reconnecting with friends once she arrived in Cincinnati. It's easy to dismiss details like that as trivial, but they matter enormously in a sport this relentless. The WTA calendar doesn't pause for celebration or recovery. Players travel city to city, adjusting to different surfaces and time zones with almost no meaningful rest, all while absorbing a physical toll few outside the sport understand. Burnout quietly derails more promising careers than almost any single opponent ever could. A 21-year-old who understands the value of stepping back, even briefly, before her next major test is a player thinking about longevity, not just the next scoreline. By the time she touched down in Cincinnati, the numbers told the story of a player in career-best form, a maiden WTA title, a career-high ranking, a first-ever Grand Slam seeding, and 7 wins across 2 tournaments. Now came the tournament that was about to become the toughest test of her career yet. On the day the Cincinnati Open seedings were confirmed, one name stood out for reasons that went far beyond ordinary tournament logistics. Alex Eala had been confirmed as the number 17 seed, the highest seeding of her career at a WTA 1000 event, the tier just below the Grand Slams. To understand why this matters, it helps to understand what a WTA 1000 seeding represents. These are events where every seeded position is earned through months of consistent, high-level performance against the best players in the world. For Eala to secure the 17th seed is the culmination of everything that unfolded across her 2026 season: Wimbledon, Washington, Toronto, all compounding into a ranking high enough to guarantee her a seeded spot among the tour's biggest events. It's worth noting that the seed came in part because several higher-ranked players withdrew from the tournament, a common occurrence on a tour constantly reshaped by injuries and scheduling. That detail changes nothing about the accomplishment. Her ranking reflects months of results against elite competition, not a fortunate bracket. As a seeded player, Eala also secures a first-round bye, advancing directly into the second round, buying her recovery time after a demanding stretch through Washington and Toronto, while sidestepping the always dangerous risk of an early upset against a dangerous floater. But the difficulty of her tournament is only beginning to reveal itself. Held at the Lindner Family Tennis Center in Mason, Ohio, this year's Cincinnati Open is stacked with talent as the final major hardcourt proving ground before the U.S. Open. World number 1 Aryna Sabalenka leads the field, followed by Elena Rybakina, Jessica Pegula, Coco Gauff, and Mira Andreeva. Further down sits former world number 1 Iga Swiatek, alongside a dangerous supporting cast that includes Amanda Anisimova, Linda Noskova, and Naomi Osaka. This is one of the most stacked fields assembled all season. For Eala, being seeded into a tournament this size is a genuine milestone. But as the draw sheet took shape, it became clear her path through this event was about to become one of the most demanding tests any rising player has faced all year. Every great sports story eventually reaches its central conflict, the moment all the buildup collides with a single, brutal reality. For Eala, that reality is the Cincinnati draw, and the road ahead of her is nothing short of a gauntlet. After her bye, Eala's tournament opens in round 2 against the winner of Romania's Elena Gabriela Ruse and Poland's Magda Linette. She already has history against both, a competitive record against Linette, but a previous loss to Ruse. Nothing about this opener is a formality. Survive that, and the draw only intensifies. A projected third round could bring Amanda Anisimova, one of the most powerful ball strikers on tour, capable of ending points in a single blistering exchange. Beyond that looms a potential fourth-round clash with Linda Noskova, the reigning Wimbledon champion and one of the most dangerous young talents in the sport. And if Eala somehow navigates all of that, the draw opens into territory that borders on the unthinkable for a player still establishing herself among the elite. A projected quarter-final against Jessica Pegula would carry drama no scriptwriter could plan better. Pegula is the very player Eala beat in the Washington final weeks earlier. A rematch with a semi-final on the line would be a statement match either way. Survive that, and next is a potential semi-final against Iga Swiatek, a former world number 1 whose relentless baseline game has dismantled far more experienced opponents. And at the end of that path sits Aryna Sabalenka, the world number 1, the top seed, and arguably the most dominant force in women's tennis right now. Pegula, Swiatek, Sabalenka. 3 former Grand Slam finalists standing between Eala and a place in the final. Very few 21-year-olds in the history of the sport have faced a gauntlet like this so early in their rise. And yet, if this season has taught us anything about Eala, it's that she doesn't get intimidated by the moment in front of her. This is a player who left home as a child to chase a dream her country had never seen fulfilled. A player who ground through the unglamorous lower levels with no guarantee of ever breaking through. A player who arrived at Miami a relative unknown and left it one of the most talked about names in the sport. A player who, weeks ago, beat Jessica Pegula, one of the very opponents now standing in her path to win her first career title. Cincinnati won't be easy. The draw in front of her is one of the toughest any rising player has faced all season. But this is also a player who has made a habit of rewriting expectations every time the tennis world thought it finally understood her ceiling. Whether she can navigate this gauntlet to a historic final remains to be seen. What's certain is that every match she plays in Cincinnati will be must-watch tennis, a young star with everything to gain, standing across the net from the best the sport has to offer, with a place in Philippine sporting history on the line. The next few weeks could define the rest of Eala's career. And we'll be here to cover every single moment of it. Subscribe to Tennis Pulse and hit the notification bell for more tennis news, drama, and analysis every week.